The storm outside mirrors the twists in tonight's tale. As I unravel this story, I hope it soothes your mind and stirs your imagination just enough. Let it be the bridge to a calm, dream-filled sleep. Rest easy. It was supposed to be a routine late-night commute. Just me, the rhythmic clatter of the subway train, and the endless stretch of tunnels beneath the city. I pulled an all-nighter at work, finishing up a project that couldn't wait until morning. By the time I stepped onto the platform, the station was nearly deserted. A few flickering fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting uneven pools of yellowish light across cracked tiles. The train arrived with its usual screech of metal on metal, the doors hissing open like a tired exhale. Inside, the car was empty save for a single figure seated near the far end. A man in a tattered overcoat, his face obscured by the brim of a wide hat. He didn't look up as I entered, nor did he acknowledge my presence when I chose a seat several rows away. I tried not to think too much about him. People ride subways alone at odd hours for all sorts of reasons, right? Still, there was something off-putting about the way he sat so still, almost unnaturally so. His hands rested on his knees, gloved fingers curled slightly inward, and his posture was rigid, as though he were waiting for something or someone. As the train lurched forward, I leaned back in my seat, letting the gentle sway of the car lull me into a daze. The rhythmic hum of the tracks and the low hum of the engine created a kind of white noise that made it easy to zone out. My eyelids grew heavy, and for a while I drifted somewhere between sleep and wakefulness. That's when I heard it, the faintest sound, barely audible over the rumble of the train. A soft scrape, like nails dragging against glass. My eyes snapped open, heart pounding as I scanned the car. The man in the overcoat hadn't moved, but now I noticed something strange. His shadow, or rather, the lack of one. The overhead lights cast clear silhouettes of everything else. The poles, the seats, even my own slouched form. But where his shadow should have been, there was only emptiness. A void darker than the surrounding darkness. It wasn't natural. Shadows don't just disappear. A chill ran down my spine, and I shifted uncomfortably in my seat, trying to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe the lighting was playing tricks on me. Maybe I was more exhausted than I realized. But then the train passed through a patch of tunnel so dark that the interior lights flickered momentarily. And when they came back on, the man was closer. Not by much. Maybe a row or two, but definitely closer than before. And this time, his head was tilted ever so slightly in my direction, as if he were studying me from beneath the brim of his hat. "Excuse me," I said, my voice cracking slightly. "Is this seat taken?" He didn't respond, didn't move, just sat there, utterly motionless, as the train rattled onward. That's when I noticed the others. At first I thought they were reflections, distorted images of myself caught in the grimy windows. But no, these figures were real. They stood along the edges of the car, pressed against the walls, their faces pale and featureless. Their bodies swayed gently with the movement of the train, but their feet never touched the floor. My breath hitched in my throat, and this had to be some kind of hallucination, brought on by stress or lack of sleep. But the longer I stared, the clearer they became. There were 5 of them now, maybe 6, their hollow eyes fixed unblinkingly on me. And then the train stopped. The train jolted to a halt with a metallic screech that echoed through the tunnel like a scream. The lights flickered again, casting erratic shadows across the car before settling into a dim glow. Outside the windows, the darkness was absolute. No platforms, no signs, nothing but the endless void of the underground. Rain pounded against the roof of the train in heavy sheets, though how it reached us so far below ground was impossible to explain. Thunder rolled in the distance, its deep rumble reverberating through the metal walls of the car. Each flash of lightning illuminated the interior just long enough to reveal the figures standing along the edges, their featureless faces turned toward me. I gripped the edge of my seat, knuckles white, as panic began to creep in. This wasn't right. Trains didn't stop between stations, not unless something was wrong. But there was no announcement over the intercom, No explanation from the driver, just silence, broken only by the relentless drumming of rain and the occasional crack of thunder. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling despite my best effort to sound calm. "Is anyone else here?" No response. The man in the overcoat remained motionless, his head still tilted slightly in my direction. His shadow, or rather, the absence of one, seemed to stretch unnaturally, spilling onto the floor around him like spilled ink. And the others? They didn't move either. They simply stood there, swaying gently with the train's vibrations, their hollow eyes locked on mine. Another bolt of lightning lit up the car, brighter this time, and I saw something that made my stomach churn. Beneath the brim of the man's hat, where his face should have been, there was nothing but emptiness, a black void that seemed to swallow the light whole. My heart raced as I stood abruptly, clutching my bag tightly to my chest. "This isn't funny," I said, louder now, desperation creeping into my tone. "What do you want from me?" Still, no answer. The figures didn't react, didn't blink, didn't breathe. It was as if they weren't alive, but they weren't quite dead either. Whatever they were, they exuded an aura of menace, their presence suffocating in the cramped confines of the subway car. The rain intensified, hammering down with such force that the entire train shuddered. Thunder roared overhead, shaking the very foundation of the tunnel. Through the chaos, I heard it again, the faint scrape of nails against glass. Only this time, it wasn't coming from outside. It was closer, much closer. I spun around, searching for the source, and froze. One of the faceless figures had detached itself from the wall and was gliding silently toward me. Its movements were fluid, yet unnatural, like smoke given form. With each step, or glide, it grew more distinct, its outline sharpening, until it resembled a human shape draped in tattered clothing. "Stay back!" I shouted, backing away until my back hit the cold metal pole behind me. My voice echoed eerily in the confined space, swallowed almost instantly by the storm raging above us. The figure stopped a few feet away, tilting its head in the same manner as the man in the overcoat. Then, without warning, it raised an arm, pointing past me toward the doors at the far end of the car. Lightning flashed once more, illuminating the sign above them. The words sent a jolt of terror through me. Abandoned station. That couldn't be possible. The city hadn't used certain lines in decades. Not since parts of the subway system were shut down due to structural failures. No one went to those places anymore. They were sealed off, forgotten. But the train lurched forward suddenly, jerking violently as it resumed its journey. The lights flickered wildly, plunging the car into near-total darkness for a brief moment. When they stabilized again, the faceless figure was gone. So were the others, all except the man in the overcoat, who now sat directly across from me. His head lifted slowly, revealing the gaping void beneath his hat. A low, guttural sound emanated from him. Not quite a voice, but something deeper, more primal. It vibrated in my chest, resonating with the thunder outside. And then he spoke, his words barely audible over the storm. "You shouldn't have gotten on." The man's voice, or whatever it was, hung in the air like a curse, heavy and suffocating. My mind raced, trying to process what he'd said. "You shouldn't have gotten on." What did that mean? Was this some kind of warning, a threat, or just another layer of madness creeping into my already unraveling sanity? I stared at him, unable to look away from the abyss where his face should have been. The void seemed to pulse faintly, as if alive, drawing me in, despite every instinct screaming at me to run. The train rattled onward through the darkness, its wheels screeching against the tracks in a rhythm that felt almost mocking now. Outside, the storm raged on, rain lashing against the windows with increasing ferocity. Thunder cracked violently, shaking the car and sending a fresh wave of panic coursing through me. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the sign above the doors once more. The words glowed faintly, as if powered by some unseen force, their letters flickering like dying embers. I glanced back at the man in the overcoat, but he hadn't moved. He simply sat there, watching me with that endless void, waiting for something. "What do you want?" I demanded, my voice rising sharply. "Why are you doing this?" He didn't respond, Not verbally, anyway. Instead, the void beneath his hat widened slightly, stretching outward until it seemed to consume half the car. Shadows spilled from it like tendrils, snaking across the floor and up the walls, twisting into grotesque shapes that resembled human figures. They surrounded me, pressing in from all sides, their forms flickering in and out of existence with each flash of lightning. Panic surged through me as I backed toward the doors, clutching the handle tightly. If I could just get out, if I could escape onto the next platform, I might have a chance. But the train showed no signs of slowing down, and the figures kept coming, closing in with unnatural speed. One of them reached for me, its hand passing through the air like smoke before solidifying inches from my face. Its touch was icy cold, sending a jolt of pain through my arm that made me cry out. I stumbled backward, tripping over my own feet and landing hard on the floor. But the bag slipped from my grasp, spilling its contents: a water bottle, a notebook, my phone across the grimy tiles. As I scrambled to gather my things, I noticed something strange about the notebook. Its pages were flipping open on their own, stopping abruptly at a blank page near the middle. Words began to appear, written in jagged, uneven handwriting, as if someone invisible were scribbling furiously. My breath caught in my throat. The message wasn't mine. It couldn't be. Yet it felt urgent, desperate, as though whoever or whatever was writing it was trying to help me. But why? And who? Before I could think too much about it, the train shuddered violently, throwing me off balance again. The lights flickered wildly, plunging the car into darkness for several seconds before stabilizing. When they came back on, the figures had vanished, retreating into the shadows as quickly as they'd appeared, all except one. Standing near the doors was a woman, or at least what looked like a woman. Her body was translucent, her features blurred and indistinct, but her eyes burned with an intensity that froze me in place. She raised a trembling hand, pointing toward the exit. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm. "You have to leave. Now." Her plea sent a chill down my spine. There was something heartbreaking about her tone, as if she were begging not just for my safety, but for her own redemption. Before I could respond, the train began to slow, its brakes squealing loudly as we approached the abandoned station. Through the rain-streaked windows, I caught glimpses of the platform ahead. It was decrepit, overrun with vines and moss, its edges crumbling into the abyss below. Flickering fluorescent lights buzzed weakly overhead, casting sickly greenish hues across the scene. The air inside the car grew colder, heavier, as if the very atmosphere was resisting our arrival. The doors hissed open with a mechanical groan, revealing the desolate platform beyond. The woman gestured frantically toward it, her expression pleading. "Go," she urged, her voice cracking with desperation. "Don't stay on the train." But stepping out into that darkness felt like walking into a nightmare. The wind howled through the tunnels, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and decay. Somewhere in the distance, I heard faint whispers, voices overlapping in a language I couldn't understand, yet somehow knew were meant for me. I hesitated, torn between two impossible choices: stay on the train with the man in the overcoat and his shadowy companions, or step out into the unknown, trusting the ghostly woman who claimed I had to leave. Thunder boomed overhead, drowning out all other sounds. The decision had to be made, now. The decision came down to instinct. I grabbed my bag, clutching it tightly to my chest, and bolted toward the open doors. The woman's form flickered as I passed her, her translucent hand brushing against my shoulder in a fleeting gesture of reassurance or warning. Her touch was cold but oddly comforting, like the last breath of winter before spring. As soon as my feet hit the platform, the train lurched forward again, its wheels screeching in protest. I turned just in time to see the man in the overcoat staring directly at me, his void-like face widening impossibly, as if he were screaming silently. Then the doors slammed shut, and the train disappeared into the darkness of the tunnel, leaving me alone on the abandoned platform. For a moment, there was silence. No rain, no thunder, no whispers, just the oppressive weight of the underground pressing down on me. The air smelled damp and metallic, tinged with the faint aroma of rust and mildew. Above me, the flickering lights buzzed erratically, casting disjointed shadows that danced across the cracked tiles. But then the whispers returned. They started softly, barely audible over the hum of the lights, but quickly grew louder, overlapping and colliding until they formed a cacophony of voices. Some pleaded, others screamed, all of them desperate. And beneath it all, I could hear something else, a low guttural growl that seemed to emanate from the very walls themselves. "Why did you bring me here?" I shouted, spinning around to face the empty platform. "What do you want from me?" There was no answer, only the sound of footsteps echoing behind me. Slowly, reluctantly, I turned to see the woman standing a few yards away, her translucent form shimmering faintly in the dim light. She looked different now, less ghostly, more solid, though still unmistakably not alive. Her eyes burned with an intensity that made it hard to look away. "You shouldn't have stayed on the train," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "It wasn't your stop." "What are you talking about?" I demanded, my voice cracking under the strain of fear and confusion. "Who are you? What is this place?" She hesitated, glancing over her shoulder as if expecting something or someone to appear. When she spoke again, her words were measured, deliberate. "This station is where we wait," she said. "For those who get off too late, for those who refuse to leave when they should." "Wait for what?" I asked, dread pooling in my stomach. "For the train to come back," she whispered, "and take us home." Her last word sent a shiver down my spine. Home? What kind of home could possibly exist beyond this forsaken place? Before I could ask, the ground beneath my feet trembled violently, accompanied by a deafening roar that shook the entire platform. Dust rained down from the ceiling, and the lights overhead exploded one by one, plunging the station into near total darkness. In the chaos, the woman vanished, leaving me utterly alone. Panic surged through me as I stumbled backward, searching for any sign of escape. But the tunnels leading away from the platform were pitch black, their entrances yawning like hungry mouths ready to swallow me whole. Then I saw it, the train. It emerged from the darkness slowly, its headlights cutting through the gloom like twin beams of malevolence. This wasn't the same train I'd ridden earlier. This one was older, its paint peeling and windows shattered, revealing rows of empty seats stained with grime. The screech of its brakes was deafening, drowning out even the storm raging above. When it finally stopped, the doors slid open with a mechanical groan. Inside, the car was filled with passengers, all of them faceless, their bodies swaying gently despite the absence of motion. They turned their hollow gazes toward me, beckoning silently. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "No, I'm not getting on." But the pull was irresistible. It wasn't physical. It was deeper than that, as if some unseen force had taken hold of my mind and was dragging me forward against my will. My legs moved without my consent, carrying me closer to the train despite every fiber of my being screaming to run. Just as I reached the threshold, a hand shot out from the crowd inside the car, grabbing my wrist with icy strength. Its grip was unrelenting, pulling me aboard whether I wanted to go or not. As I stumbled into the car, the doors slammed shut behind me, sealing me inside. The interior was suffocating, the air thick with the stench of decay. The faceless figures surrounded me, closing in until there was nowhere left to move. Their whispers filled my ears, overlapping into a single deafening roar. "Welcome home," and then everything went black. When I opened my eyes, I was no longer on the train. At least, not in the way I understood it. The world around me was distorted, a surreal blend of memories and nightmares stitched together like a patchwork quilt. Familiar faces flickered in and out of existence. People I'd known, places I'd been, but none of them stayed long enough for me to grasp. The air was heavy, oppressive, as if the weight of countless lives pressed down on me. I could hear whispers again, but this time they weren't pleading or angry. They were resigned, weary. They spoke in fragments, disjointed sentences that made little sense individually, but formed a haunting narrative when pieced together. "We waited too long. The train always comes back. No one leaves." I tried to move, to escape whatever limbo I'd found myself in. But my body felt impossibly heavy, rooted to the spot. My surroundings shifted constantly, morphing from the abandoned station to an endless subway tunnel, then to a crowded car filled with faceless passengers, who stared at me with empty eyes. Each scene bled into the next, seamless yet jarring, until I couldn't tell what was real anymore. And then I saw her, the woman from the platform. She stood apart from the others, her form clearer now, almost human. Her translucent skin shimmered faintly in the dim light, and her eyes burned with sorrow rather than fear. "You shouldn't have gotten on," she said softly, echoing the man in the overcoat's earlier warning. "But now you're here with us. Where is this?" I asked, my voice trembling. "What happens now?" She hesitated, glancing over her shoulder as if afraid someone or something might overhear. When she turned back to me, her expression was grim. "This is where we wait," she repeated, "for the train to come again, and when it does." She trailed off, unable to finish the thought. "For what?" I pressed, though part of me already knew the answer. "To take us farther," she whispered, "deeper, to wherever it goes after this." Her words sent a chill through me. This wasn't just a stop. It was a waypoint, a holding cell for lost souls caught between worlds. The train didn't bring people home. It carried them further away, deeper into some unknowable abyss. "But why?" I demanded, my voice rising in desperation. "Why does it keep coming back? Why can't anyone leave?" Her gaze softened, tinged with pity. "Because we chose to stay," she said. "When we had the chance to get off, to step into the light, we hesitated. We held on too tightly to what we left behind. And now, we ride forever." The realization hit me like a freight train. All those stories about ghost trains, haunted subways, they weren't just urban legends. They were warnings. The train preyed on regret, on fear, on the things people clung to even after death. It offered salvation but delivered damnation instead. Before I could respond, the ground beneath us began to tremble. A low rumble echoed through the tunnels, growing louder with each passing second. The lights flickered violently, casting jagged shadows across the walls. The whispers intensified, rising to a fever pitch as the passengers turned their hollow gazes toward the horizon. "It's coming," the woman said, her voice barely audible over the chaos. "You'll see soon enough." "No," I shouted, backing away instinctively. "I don't belong here. Let me go." But there was nowhere to run. The tunnel ahead lit up with twin beams of light, cutting through the darkness like knives. The screech of metal on metal filled the air, deafening and unrelenting. The train emerged once more, its ancient frame groaning under the strain of centuries of travel. Its doors slid open, revealing the same grimy interior filled with faceless figures, swaying gently in eternal silence. One by one, the passengers around me began to board, disappearing into the car without hesitation. Even the woman stepped forward, pausing only briefly to look back at me. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "There's no other way." And then she was gone, swallowed by the train along with the others. I stood frozen, paralyzed by fear and disbelief, as the crowd thinned until only I remained. The train's headlights bore into me, pulling me forward despite my resistance. My legs moved against my will, carrying me closer to the yawning doorway. The whispers grew louder, merging into a single deafening roar. "Welcome aboard." As I crossed the threshold, the doors slammed shut behind me, sealing me inside. The car was suffocating, the air thick with the stench of decay and despair. The faceless figures surrounded me, closing in until there was no space left to breathe. Then the train lurched forward, plunging into the endless darkness of the tunnel. Hours later, or maybe days, time had lost all meaning. I sat slumped in my seat, staring blankly at the floor. The whispers continued, a constant reminder of where I was and what awaited me. Outside the windows, the tunnel stretched on forever, twisting and turning without end. Every so often, the train would stop at another abandoned station, its doors hissing open to reveal new passengers, waiting silently on the platform. Some looked confused, others terrified, but none resisted. They boarded without question, joining the ranks of the faceless riders, trapped in this purgatory. At one such stop, I noticed a young man stepping aboard, his wide eyes scanning the car in panic. He locked eyes with me for a brief moment, and I opened my mouth to speak, to warn him, to beg him to turn back, but no sound came out. My voice was gone, stolen by the void. Instead, I simply watched as he took his seat among the others, his features slowly fading, until he became just another shadow in the crowd. The train rumbled onward, never stopping for long, always moving deeper into the unknown. And as the miles passed, I realized the truth. I wasn't just a passenger anymore. I was part of the train itself, bound to its endless journey through the dark. Somewhere far above, rain continued to fall, thunder rolling across the city like distant echoes of the storm that had brought me here. But down below, in the forgotten depths of the subway system, the train kept riding, carrying its cargo of lost souls farther and farther away from the world of the living. Forever.